Hi, everyone. Thank you again for being here with us. And it's really my pleasure to introduce to you all Vitalik Buterin. Thank you, Vitalik, for joining us here for this fireside chat.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So we first met in 2015 in San Francisco on your original roadshow for the Ethereum ICO. And I was really impressed by the vision for the Ethereum ecosystem. And it's one of my greatest regrets in life, not having jumped in with a small bit of investment that day. I admit I was completely daunted by the prospect of what you were building, and I didn't think it was possible. So when we met a year later in Shanghai, it was clear that I was mostly wrong. And in my new role at Hyperledger, I was intent on making sure that we didn't second guess this community being built, even while Hyperledger was set to really explore the more permission side of the blockchain space. These days, I like to think that while we're more full spectrum at Hyperledger with Hyperledger Bezu and other efforts that bridge these two worlds, so what we're here to do is talk about the future of Ethereum and how it relates to this thing called the enterprise. But I want to start on these early days. So let me ask, even before Ethereum kicked off, you participated in the early days in the development of the Bitcoin ecosystem and the Bitcoin code base. What was it about those early days of that open source community around Bitcoin that made it so accessible to a young Vitalik?
And I think one of the fascinating things about the Bitcoin community early on is just how it managed to attract and bring together like many very different kinds of people, right? Because like crypto as a whole is itself a very multidisciplinary thing, right? You have the cryptography, you have the math, you have the economics, you have the monetary theory, you have the social and political implications, you have businesses trying to do things with it. And there are definitely many different people, like even back in the community in 2011, that just came at it from all of these different perspectives. Right, and sometimes the perspectives are very different, and there is even some healthy and vigorous debate on the Bitcoin forums back in 2011. This was back before they were even called Bitcoin Talk, and I was interested in a lot of things at the time. Like I've always been interested in math. I've been interested in cryptography. I was interested in economics as well. Also, interested in, I guess, the bigger questions of life and human civilization. So the Bitcoin community definitely had kind of some of all of that, and it was just a great forum to just talk with other people that had all of these different and interesting ideas. And then also there was this just vibrant community of people that was just willing to come in and help and build whatever needed to be built, right? Like we needed to build a Bitcoin client, and there was this community of core developers that was working on and improving the client. We needed to build Bitcoin wallets. People came in and just made wallets, and you needed a way for people to see what's going on in the blockchain. People just came in and built block explorers. So there was this great kind of community collaborative feeling there at the time, which I definitely really like, and that's definitely one of the things that I definitely really value and kind of care about really trying to support in Ethereum as well.
Yeah. Well, sometimes when we in the open source community talk about the community and about how things work, we can sometimes I'm guilty of making it sound like spontaneous combustion. Like these things just happened and we didn't know why or how. But when you think about the Ethereum ecosystem now and like the role that the foundation is playing and others, are there specific things like you think about or that they think about in terms of helping foster the right kind of community around, especially the development, the open source community around the development of Ethereum?
I think having a good open source community definitely there's a lot of different ingredients that I think you need to get right. Like one of them is just that like the ecosystem needs to be one that's kind of open and welcoming, and like if someone wants to come in and contribute, they actually can go do that. Like it's definitely easy to just even accidentally fail at that and like accidentally just end up either driving away contributors when you don't need to, or just like not making it clear that there's things where people just can go in and participate. Also, I think Ethereum has been kind of successful just because of what it is, right? Like it's not a kind of, finite bounded system in the sense of just, here's one thing that you can do with it. And like, this is money, or this is a domain name system, or like, this is one thing. It's an open platform, and people can just, go and do and like build their own like interesting and amazing things. And just like having that space is also, I think, important for having an ecosystem that developers are excited about. Yeah. Also, I mean, I think there's just like, you do have to get the economics right. Like, and this is one of the challenges of this community is, right? Like, especially with crypto, that like, on the one hand, well, like I think like the biggest difference I think between like crypto projects and the ecosystem and say the open source ecosystem of the early 2000s is that like there's money involved, and there's like a significant amount of money kind of floating around. You got the coins, and the coins go up, and then the coins go down, and then there's new coins, and then there's new coins going up and down. And on the one hand, like this means that you actually have an opportunity to like try to even pay people, like compensate people who are doing really important work, which I think is important, right? Like you can rely on volunteers for some things, you can rely on volunteers for smaller projects, but the challenge with kind of just relying on volunteers kind of going forever is that, like, first of all, you're not going to necessarily attract enough people, and also like if you have this ecosystem where like some people are contributing for free but then other people are making millions off of it, like that just feels very unfair to people, right? And like that is a legitimate challenge of the crypto space as well, right? That like sometimes you do have this imbalance, and like you make this one valuable tool and like, okay, maybe you can get a grant, but then you make this other thing where like you've come up with a way to stick a coin in the middle of it, and you get like $25 million of VC investment flying at you, and like that's an imbalance. And we've definitely like tried to do our best to address that imbalance, and like at the same time as trying to prevent like the Ethereum Foundation itself from sort of being an overly dominant pull in the ecosystem. So that's also a challenge. Another important challenge is just like appealing to the kind of diverse community. Like, not everyone that might want to contribute speaks English. That's probably the most obvious example. And like just making, our content, documentation, everything is like accessible in different languages, trying to actually engage with all of the local communities is something that we've valued and really tried to do for a long time as well.
Cool. Well, yeah, so many different pressures at play, and compared to like the idyllic early days of Apache or Linux or something like that, it sometimes feels like these pressures can really create such an intense kind of pressure cooker environment. Some of those pressures increasingly feel like they might be coming from people trying to adopt these technologies for enterprise uses. I think of the enterprise, I think of Star Trek or whatever as kind of this almost impossibly big or menacing thing. But really, some of these are for very prosaic use cases, right? For settlement systems, for regulatory reporting or auditing, that sort of thing. How much are those pressures on the backs of the core Ethereum developers? How much are you thinking about this, especially with the design for Ethereum 2? Were these kinds of use cases and needing to support those use cases on your minds as you were designing the ETH2 design?
Yeah, and I think like enterprise users of blockchains are definitely really important, and I think like the biggest way in which ETH2 in particular can help enterprises is just having more scalability, right? That's because right now transaction fees are high, and one of the challenges with transaction fees being high is that, like, first of all, it just prices out users, but like it prices out different kinds of users differently, right? Like I think the people who get priced out first often are just like, the people that wants to use the blockchain for like doing like non-financial things, like whether it's, supply chain tracking or even things like ENS or like just about everything that's not moving high value crypto tokens around. And so when the fees go up to $10, like, all that's left is like, well, there's some high value domains and then there's like a lot of moving crypto tokens around. And our vision in Ethereum has always been to be this platform that's open to all of these different applications where, the limit is just your creativity. But if in practice, just the economics make it so it's only viable to do a few things, then in some ways that's like a big limitation on how much of our mission we can actually accomplish. So the dream of scalability, right, is we have rollups, and rollups already exist for some applications, and now general purpose rollups are coming very soon, right? Like Arbitrum recently released their thing on mainnet, and then Optimism has a kind of limited rollout on mainnet that they've been slowly expanding over time. ZK Sync has been making great progress. Right, and at the same time, we've been working on sharding, which kind of improves the base layer itself, so that at the base layer you have something like 100 times more scalability, right? So sharding times 100, rollup times 100, the two multiply times 10,000, and like the hope is that you can simultaneously make the platform able to handle more users and like reduce transaction fees, right? And so it's like supply and demand, right? You have more supply, and so you don't have like all of these users kind of bidding against each other so hard. So if transaction fees can go down, then we're hoping by a factor of 100, but we'll see. And then that like opens the door for all of these other applications again. And like there are a lot of people, even in enterprise, that even wants to use the public chain, right? Like there's like EY and like the Nightfall, I think it was. There's like the baseline protocol. There's all of these amazing groups trying to like do public chain based enterprise things. And again, I definitely believe in kind of the public chain, I guess, because like I don't even like want to see a future where like enterprise and kind of the people have to be these kind of two different poles that are like are either different universes or kind of viewed as opposing each other. Like we should have an ecosystem where the enterprises and everyone, they can just all live together, and the ecosystems can kind of plug into each other and benefit each other much more. But the challenge is that if you want anyone to be building on the public chain, then the transaction fees have to go down, and then also privacy issues have to be solved, and that's like the other benefit, right? Like you have all of these like very diverse different groups like just building and working on this technology, and like everyone can just use each other's stuff ideally, right? So I'm optimistic about that future.
Good. And you mean it isn't as easy as just increasing the block size by 10x?
No.
Elon said it was, so I thought that was the case. And obviously, one of the big changes coming up in Ethereum too is the move from proof of work to proof of stake, which a lot of people are concerned about the energy consumption of mainnet of cryptocurrencies in general. How much was the environmental concerns on your mind as you were designing 2.0? Is the move largely driven by that, or were there other motivations?
And I think it's definitely a major reason why people wants to move over. I think like the consequences of the amount of like energy and even just stuff that proof of work systems consume are pretty significant, right? Like, and people like often talk about the energy waste aspect, but then there's also like, first of all, even if you're using amazing solar power, like you're still, which there's not everyone is, like you're still taking away energy that could be used by other people. And like we've seen like in Iran, the government's been angry because of like electricity being displaced from local villages and so forth. And then there's hardware, and hardware has its own environmental costs. So going from that to a consensus model where the economics are fully virtualized, which is what proof of stake is, right? Like we've even talked about like proof of stake validators as being kind of like virtual miners, right? They're like miners, except it's all kind of digital and just simulated by the system, and that just like completely solves all of these problems. So we don't even have to argue about them, and we don't have to just like get into these lengthy debates of like who's using coal and who's using solar, and like is the solar actually solar, and all of this stuff. Like no, just like make a system where the resource requirements as a whole are just more than 1,000 times lower. Like that's definitely a big motivation for us. I mean, obviously, of course, at the same time, there is kind of the more selfish factor, which is that if you reduce, like, the fact that you need so much electricity and like hardware, like you also need to pay for that stuff. And to pay for that stuff, you just have to like print a huge number of coins. And that, like, you know, it does risk the economic sustainability of the system if kind of you have to choose between, you know, either the supply of coins just kind of continuing to go up nonstop, or between potentially risking security going down to very low levels. And like, once again, you know, at the proof of stake, we don't have that trade-off. So I think, you know, it's good for the Ethereum community, good for the users, good for the world. It's always great when things line up that way.
Yeah, that's great. And just as a wrap-up question, what is the one technology you think in the Ethereum ecosystem as a whole that you're most excited about when you think about the needs of enterprises, or the needs of getting this kind of infrastructure adopted by the mainstream of society?
What kind of infrastructure? I think like some of the higher level stuff that I'm most concerned about. So I think like we've talked about privacy, and I've talked about it a lot previously as well, and it's definitely important, right? Like, you know, you don't want Twitter for your bank account, right? And like the nice thing about like combining blockchains and cryptography is that you have a lot of room to just like make all of these like different compromises between you know, privacy and what your other goals are. You can kind of much more freely define like what it is you're actually getting. And at the same time, you know, the blockchain has this verifiability and auditability. So, you know, if you like need if you need like, well, whether for an audit or investigation or something, like prove that, you know, here's things that happened before, and like, look, I did everything the way I was supposed to be doing, like you can, and you can just kind of selectively reveal whatever information you want, right? Like, so there's a great future for like improving privacy. Security, I think, is also important, right? Like, I still remember and frequently link back to the Bitcoin Magazine article I wrote in 2013. This was like Bitcoin wallet security. And there were these kind of nightmare stories of, you know, a guy has $500,000 of Bitcoin, and then he wakes up and then he doesn't have $500,000 of Bitcoin. What happened? I don't think we know yet. And you know, you can hack someone's computer can get lost. If you write the words down on a piece of paper, someone can steal the piece of paper can get lost. You know, there's just all of these things that can happen. And like, I've talked about ideas, like I've talked about things like multi-sig wallets and social recovery wallets and all of these things to try to like reduce the risk that things like that happen, and like actually make like cryptographic keys, or at least kind of blockchain wallets, a more viable way of like authenticating a person. But you know, this is, you know, like, I feel like we've seen fairly big improvements over the last 3 years as well, right? And I feel like, you know, we're going to continue to see improvements in the future. So, you know, once again, like, it's both, like, for me, a big concern and a worry, but it's also something that I'm like very excited about seeing fixed, because I know it is going to be fixed.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Vitalik. I mean, I'm reminded of the quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which is, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And I see this pattern repeated, whether it's the early days of the internet, people were concerned we can't use it for commercial purposes because it's this research thing and it's unreliable. Then they said that about open source software. You know, and there's that transition point in like the late 90s where it's like, okay, maybe we can use this for enterprises. And I think that's a similar transition point we're at when it comes to thinking about the full spectrum of blockchain technologies. And I think the Ethereum ecosystem is playing a key role in that transition. So thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to talking with you again soon.
No, thank you, Brian. And thank you for just all the great work you've been doing with Hyperledger.
Very sweet. Thanks.